Aloha, friends. Thank you for your patience. I don't know why I keep having these technical challenges, but I am. I'm going to try one more time to just double check that the video is working. I think it is. Yay. Okay. So the thing that I don't understand is I keep losing the option to share my screen with you guys. I did a whole PowerPoint and I can't find it again. All right. Well, I'm just going to share and I'll forget my PowerPoint. Um, okay. So, what I want to share with you guys, I'm going to open this up for a second. All right, thanks for your patience, everybody. Um, okay, awesome. All right, so I wanted to just start. I'll introduce myself. I'm Sarah Snyder. I know some of you, many of you in this group, and I'm just so grateful for everybody's support and interest in all the things that I've been sharing. Um, and I find that, so I am a licensed therapist, LCSW, and a registered yoga teacher, and a mental health educator. I was a high school counselor and teacher for 12 years. And I have felt called to kind of expand my reach. And that's why I'm here doing, with this wellness circle online, is that I really wanted to be able to reach more women and impact more women. Um, and the wellness circle has been an incredible way to do that. So it's been, really fun and I'm enjoying this process. But I love teaching and I want to be able to share some of the things that I know and that I feel are so important and powerful for us as women to be aware of. So again, really sorry, I haven't figured out how to share my screen while I'm live. Apparently I have to start it before the live, but then you can't see me. So I'm just going to talk and maybe I'll share my PowerPoint later. But what I want to start with is basically just a quick understanding of what is considered to be, hang on, mute that one, what is considered to be a model of dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And essentially, it's this model of these three circles. One is, I call this the wise mind model. So essentially, we spend most of our time in our emotional mind, right? Our emotional mind is the part of us that operates from our limbic system, from the emotional part of our brain. Um, and it's our irrational mind. It's the part of us that like constantly has these irrational thoughts. And so you'll know that you're in your emotional mind when you catch yourself in any of the cognitive distortions I'm about to talk about. And so the challenge really for what we're going to discuss is that we want to be able to counter the emotional mind by activating our frontal lobe and essentially starting to use more of what's called our reasonable mind, to use some logic, to challenge the thinking, right? To put our thoughts on trial. And when we're able to acknowledge the emotional mind that it exists, but to not allow it to like drive our thought process, um, we are using more of our wise mind. So it's like the wise mind is the balance of the reasonable mind, right? Using a little more logical, rational, reasonable thought, but acknowledging that the emotions are still there, right? So our wise self is like our highest self. And that's actually what we want to listen to. So as I talk, if any of this like resonates or you have questions, comment, please comment. I plan to, whoever comments on this live or ask questions, I will enter your name into a little raffle to win my card deck, my Radical Self-Love Affirmation card deck, which I have on my website, aboundingcircles.com. But I'm like in love with this card deck and I'm about to get my first copy of it, the proof, and then I'm going to order a bunch. So anyways, if you comment or ask questions, you'll enter into a little giveaway. So let's keep going here. So the big idea, so that's sort of the DBT model. The CBT model, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, is the idea that our thoughts are connected to our feelings, which are connected to our behaviors, right? So our thoughts influence our feelings, which influence what we do, our actions. And this is, I think, I mean, honestly, this is what I use most in my therapy practice with my clients. So kind of a combination of CBT and DBT. But really what I want to teach about is essentially what are these thought errors, right? So now that we kind of understand, okay, so these thinking errors are coming from our more emotional mind, right? The emotional self. What are some of the thinking errors? So I'm just going to go through the top 10. I put in the event a picture from my workbook that I just created that actually has these written out for you. So if you want like a visual, you can go and just see these images of these, the top 10 basically, cognitive distortions. So here we go. So let's talk about them. So the first one is something called polarized thinking. And this is basically like all or nothing, black and white thinking, right? So it's sort of like when our thoughts are at an extreme. So an example is, if I don't do it perfectly, I'm a failure. So it's like, oh, good. Thank you, Tamara. So you can see that basically we are going from one extreme to the other extreme in our thinking, and that's never healthy. Anytime we do things in extremes, it's not a healthy thought or behavior, right? So we want to come back more to sort of our middle, our wise mind, our balance. And I'll talk about how to do that at the end. I'm just going to go through these top 10 cognitive distortions and identify them first so that what I find is that the more you're able to identify and name the distortion, the easier it is to then essentially change your behavior, right? Awareness is the first step towards changing behavior. So that is called polarized thinking. When our thinking is in these sort of all or nothing extremes. Yeah. If you ever catch yourself using the word always or never, generally you're in a cognitive distortion, right? Okay, so the second one is something called mental filtering. Basically, mental filtering is when we kind of magnify our focus to either, I mean, again, to extremes, but generally to a negative extreme. And that's where we are. So let's say you get what's it called? Like a performance evaluation at work, right? And you get tons and tons of glowing feedback from your boss, but you get like one negative comment or one piece of constructive criticism and you fixate on that. That's negative mental filtering. Yeah. Um, Another example of this is something called disqualifying the positive. And this would basically be where almost like we refuse to accept the positive. We're so fixated on the negative um, that we just almost can't even like imagine that the positive is true. So an example of disqualifying the positive would be imposter syndrome, right? So where we feel like even though we have all these qualifications and even though we know we're well qualified for a job, we feel like we're not good enough. We feel like we're not qualified enough. We're so focused on the negative that we ignore, you know, how qualified we are. Yes, Lorianne, many of us do this. Thank you for commenting, by the way. So yeah, that's a big one. Okay, the next one, number three. So this is called overgeneralization. Overgeneralization is basically when we take a singular event and we start to like draw conclusions based on that event, and then we overgeneralize and apply it to everything. So for example, let's say that you apply for multiple jobs, but you don't get one of them. So then we assume or we overgeneralize and say, I'm never going to get a job. Nobody's ever going to hire me. Right. And so again, we're overgeneralizing. We're taking one singular event and then taking it to sort of this extreme and generalizing to every situation as if that were true. Yeah. This is a common one. All right. Another one is jumping to conclusions. So when we jump to conclusions, I think we are all guilty of this one, especially during the pandemic. There's two forms, right? So the first form is what's called mind reading. Mind reading is essentially when we assume that what other people are thinking or feeling. So it's sort of like we assume we know what someone else is thinking or feeling, right? They haven't told us, but we think we're reading their mind and we know what they're thinking. And this, I got to tell you, like many of the clients who I work with in my private practice are young women, teenage girls, or young adult women. And I think that this is one that I see again and again and again is this, almost like this fear or this thought of other people don't like me. They think I'm stupid. They think I'm ugly. They don't like me, right? That whole thing. And so that is an example of mind reading. Another one is, and this is another example of jumping to conclusions. This is what's called fortune telling. And this is the one I think many of us get caught in. Fortune telling is when you are basically you're predicting the future, but without any evidence or coming from an irrational place. So it's basically where you know we're telling stories about our future as if it was true, but we really have no evidence to back that up. So like, I'm going to be single forever, or I'm never getting into college, or um, this date is going to be terrible, or nobody's going to show up to my birthday party, or whatever it is, right? Like, I think we do this all the time. So, fortune telling is a very, very common cognitive distortion. Um, all right. So, we are, let's see, where are we? We are on number 5. Okay. So, catastrophizing. So, there's 10 that I'm going to talk about today. So, catastrophizing is also a very common one. And this is basically like when we blow things way out of proportion. So, either we are magnifying things, right? I'm just reading the comments. Let's see, Lori, and there's so many years. I thought I was just empathetic. Yep, which I'm sure is still true, but I realized through trauma evaluation, I got used to reading micro expressions for safety, and then I used that in situations where it didn't apply to assess what others thought of me. That's so insightful. Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that is incredibly insightful. I think we all do this. I mean, I think sometimes we're absolutely um interpreting or misinterpreting others' micro expressions, facial expressions, comments, a look, right? We misinterpret those things. And especially if we have a history of trauma, or if we, have maybe low self-esteem, right? We struggle and we misinterpret often because our emotional mind is taking over. Um, so, I was talking about catastrophizing, right? So either we're magnifying or we're minimizing when we're catastrophizing. And if we're magnifying, we are exaggerating. It's like we're going to worst case scenario, right? So, for example, we might think like, oh my gosh, I haven't, heard from my husband. He must have gotten in an accident. There's something wrong, right? Or another example of magnification. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. My life is over. I'm never going to get through this, right? So it's like we go to this place of just total extreme, amplifying it, magnifying it, blowing it up out of proportion. Minimizing would be the opposite. Essentially, when we kind of diminish our own thoughts or another person's thoughts or feelings or even experiences. So we might say, something like, oh, that was so stupid of me, right? We like minimize our own thoughts or our own feelings, or we do that for someone else. So we might say, why does she make everything a big deal? Right. So, sort of taking something that somebody else says and minimize that as if that wasn't valid or important. So, both are an example of catastrophizing. Yeah, so please tell me if you're watching and any of these stand out to you. I'd love to hear examples in the comments of which ones you use or, so far, and an example of how you use it if you want to share. Um, Another really common one, so we're on number 6, personalization. So this is where basically we're taking things personally. We're assuming that other people are excluding us or targeting us, but there's no evidence of that, right? We just are making assumptions. So this might be like where we, almost some blaming, like this is my fault. We're personalizing, taking someone else's feelings, thoughts, behaviors, and then, uh, you know, personalizing it as if we are to blame for that. Um, or maybe we are, here we go, another example. So my sister's always mad at me. I should do more to help her, right? So feeling like, oh my gosh, it's my responsibility to take care of others' feelings and thoughts. And this is actually one of the distortions that's responsible for codependency, right? It's where we feel like we are responsible for someone else's thoughts, feelings, or reactions. And this is one of the most mind-blowing things I know in my own therapy when I was, you know, seeing a therapist. This was huge, a huge lesson for me. And as I am a therapist now and I'm working with clients, this is one that I think a lot of women identify with, because many of us, because we are caretakers, because we are, sort of programmed to tend and befriend, we feel like we have to be responsible for everyone else's feelings and thoughts and behaviors or reactions, and we don't. That's just not true. We are only responsible for ourselves, right? Um, okay, so let's keep going. We have four more to go. Blaming is number 7. Basically, blaming is like not taking responsibility for our own stuff, right? So an example might be blaming someone else, playing the victim role, holding other people responsible for our pain or our experiences, right? So this might be, what's a good example? Oh, well, so blaming someone else, like he makes me feel inadequate, right? But really, that inadequacy is actually our own distortion. It's our own insecurity that we need to work on ourselves, right? Or blaming someone else, like it's his fault that we fight all the time. Blaming your partner every time you get in an argument, as opposed to owning your part, your role in the argument. Yeah. Um, okay, good. So, and I think I saw a comment. Let's see. Oh, hey, Lauren. Okay, let's see. Lauren said, I personalize all the time. I can't bear the thought of, I'm with you, of making someone else upset. I feel responsible all the time. Very identifiable. Yeah. And honestly, I think that, like I said, this is probably one of the most common for women. I think that we personalize a lot. Um, okay, so a few more. Labeling. Labeling is essentially when we assign judgment to ourselves or to someone else based on generally a single negative incident. So, another term for labeling is something that's called the fundamental attribution error. When I used to teach an AP psychology class at a high school, I love teaching about this because I think the fundamental attribution error is like responsible for most of our stereotyping and prejudice and, um, you know, hurtful behavior. So the fundamental attribution error is essentially when we attribute a person's behavior or actions to who they are, to their personality, as opposed to their circumstance or their situation. So an example would be like, making a comment. He's such a selfish jerk. He never helps me with my project. He didn't help me with my last project that I had to turn in, and he's to blame for that. As opposed to like, well, maybe he had a lot on his plate that day, or maybe he got in an argument with his partner, or right, or here's a common one. How often have you guys heard someone say, if you're driving down the road and somebody swerves in front of you, you may even be guilty of this, right? You make a comment of like, oh, that crazy blank driver, right? Where that female driver, that, this racial slur driver, this, whatever. And I think that we tend to label when we're not, when we're in an emotional state, and when we are um, really, when we don't have enough information. We go to a place of labeling or this fundamental attribution error where we're not taking into account that someone might be swerving in front of us because maybe they're not well, maybe they're sick, maybe they're trying to take care of their child in the back seat, maybe there's a million reasons why they might swerve, right? That has nothing to do with who they are. So that's labeling. um, the last two I think are also super common. Number 9 is should statements. So a should statement is anytime you catch yourself saying um, should or should not. I should be making more money. I should have gotten an A. I shouldn't ever get a C. Right? Whatever it is. So it's like this sort of telling yourself that you should or should not be doing certain things. Anytime you catch yourself in that place, you are in a cognitive distortion, right? Shoulds or should nots are just not helpful. Like how does that help you in any way, right? It just puts expectation on us that then, to be honest, this is what I think contributes to perfectionism. Somebody asked, I think Yasha asked a comment or made a comment about that, asking sort of how certain cognitive distortions contribute to perfectionism. I think should statements are 100% to blame for part of our a belief that as women we have to do things perfectly. I should be the perfect soccer mom. I should do this. I should be able to have my kids breakfast and lunch made and have like muffins wrapped in whatever tinfoil and have all these things that we should be doing as parents or we should be doing as wives or whatever. And it's not hopeful and it's not so healthy. um, I'm just looking at the comments. I love that you guys are commenting. Thank you so much. Um, Lori said, "I wish this was public because it's so powerful and informative." Thank you. I'll see what I can do in terms of sharing this, more broadly. Um, yes, don't shit on yourself. Exactly. Yeah. What about energy though? Said Tamara. Like intuitively you feel unwelcomed or unwanted. Will you say more about that, Tamara, so I can understand? When you say that energy, are we talking the energy of like shoulds basically? Or feeling, are you saying feeling unwelcomed or unwanted? I'd love to know more about that. Yeah. Okay, so I'll keep going while she might maybe give us a little more. So the last one, which also I think this is super powerful, the last cognitive distortion is emotional reasoning. And emotional reasoning is basically when we see other people's thoughts or feelings as truth or fact. In other words, we believe that either someone else's thought or feeling or our own thought or feeling makes it true, when in fact, no, they're just thoughts, right? Or they're just feelings. That doesn't make it a fact. And also, two thoughts and two feelings can be true at the same time, right? But sometimes I hear that a lot, that, but I'm feeling this way. And so therefore, this can't be true. But no, we can have more than one thought or more than one feeling at the same time, right? And both are valid, but it doesn't necessarily, and that may be your reality and what you're experiencing, but that doesn't make it a truth, right? Or a fact. It's subjective. It's not objective. So I'll give you an example of emotional reasoning. That would be maybe the thought of like, I feel like I'm a bad friend, therefore I am a bad friend. Or my teacher thinks I'm a terrible student, therefore I am a terrible student. Right? So we assume that because the thought or the feeling is there, somehow, I know, Lorianne, I feel you. Yeah, this whole list, I know. So yeah, exactly. So we just sometimes feel as though these things are true, and I am telling you, they're not. They're just, it's your emotional mind taking over. So I think then the next question, so that's sort of our list of our top 10 cognitive distortions. Um, Right. But the next question then, I guess, is what do we do about this? So if we all experience cognitive distortions, we all get stuck in our emotional mind, what can we do about that? Well, the first step, honestly, towards changing um, unhealthy thoughts, unhealthy behavior, is that we have to be aware of them. So the more that we identify and name our cognitive distortions, it allows us to be more aware of those thinking errors, right? And hang on just a second. Okay. And the as we take that first step towards naming the cognitive distortion, the more that you can catch yourself in it of like, oh my gosh, there's my should statement. I'm doing the should thing, emotional reasoning thing, or oh, I hear myself in all or nothing thinking, or whatever it is. That's actually your first step towards changing unhealthy behaviors. Because if we remember this cognitive model or CBT model, cognitive behavioral, is that our thoughts impact our feelings, which impact our behaviors. And the whole like what I do in therapy essentially is help my clients to better understand their thoughts, because when we identify and we name our thoughts, we it separates us from it, right? We can say, oh, that's that all or nothing thinking. That's my emotional irrational mind talking, rather than owning it as if like that's who we are. You're not your emotional mind. You are who you are is your wise self, who you are is love, but sometimes we get stuck in that like irrational thinking. Um, so the other thing I was going to mention in terms of the benefit of this is that when we do practice identifying or naming the cognitive distortion, we're actually practicing metacognition, which is engaging our frontal lobe. So it's getting you out of your emotional brain, your amygdala and your limbic system, and it's getting you into your prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of good things happen. That's our reasonable mind here. This is the part of us, our prefrontal cortex is where we process empathy. It's long-term planning, decision making, judgment, moral reasoning. It allows us to like pump the brakes and like practice impulse control, delay gratification, right? So kids, for example, their frontal lobes are not fully developed. In fact, people are not, our adults are not even fully developed until they're about 25, which is why adolescents are so impulsive and often very irrational, right? So there's a lot of benefit to knowing what these cognitive distortions are and naming them. And so what can you do, right? Like how do you challenge these thoughts? Well, a couple suggestions. So I encourage my clients to keep what's called a thought record, basically just journal and keep a list, make a list in your journal of what are some of the irrational thoughts that I'm having today or this week, right? So as they come up, jot them down. What are they? Name them, right? So catch it, catch the thought, name the thought, right? And then what I like to tell people to do is don't just catch the thought, but see if you can also identify how does that thought make you feel, right? Because that's key. So if we can, identify that all or nothing thinking makes us feel really really sad or really uh what's the right word? I mean, just really, um low confidence. It makes us feel like we are judging ourselves. It makes us feel disempowered, whatever the word is, right? Once we identify how it makes us feel, and then not only that, we take it a step further and maybe not just identify the thought, the irrational thought and the feeling, but then identify what behaviors follow this feeling. So when I feel disempowered or when I feel low self-esteem or low confidence, what behaviors follow that, right? Because often that's where a lot of negative, unhealthy behaviors come in. Right? Whether it's like numbing behaviors or self-destructive harming behaviors or whatever they are. Um, it does explain a lot about our early 20s, right? We were all figuring this out. Um, yes, and Lauren, totally. I'm reading up for a second. Since it is, it's totally true that teenagers really, I mean, to their credit, they're not responsible for the fact that their brains haven't fully developed yet. You know, we as adults are, however, but I will say that if we have a history of trauma that's untreated or unhealed, it's common that we're operating out of our emotional brain because that's our trauma brain, right? That's actually the part of us that um, is triggered and goes into that fight or flight anxiety reaction, emotional reaction. Um, so, okay, a couple things. Oh, so what I wanted to mention, so keep a thought record, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, right? What are the irrational thoughts, irrational feelings, irrational behaviors that sort of follow each other? But then ask yourself, is there evidence to support this irrational thought? Like, right? So when we can identify this is not rational, this is irrational, there is no evidence to back this up, we can let it go a little bit, right? And then we can ask ourselves, what is a healthier thought that we can tell ourselves? Right? What's a healthier thing I can say? Um, and not only that, but like, how does that healthier thought make me feel? Right? So rather than I have to do this perfectly, what if we said to ourselves, I'm human, I'm doing the best I can in this moment, right? Or what's another healthier thought rather than that codependent thought of I'm responsible for other people's thoughts or emotions. A healthier thought might be I'm only responsible for myself. I cannot control other people's thoughts or feelings or behaviors. I can only control my own, right? So often I do a lot of like reframing to what's in your control versus what's out of your control in my sessions. Um, and I think that really helps people to better understand what they actually can do that's in their control that can help them to feel better. So asking yourself, is there evidence to support this thought? What's a healthier thought I can tell myself? How, how does that healthier thought make me feel? And then lastly, what action might follow that healthier thought or feeling, right? So once I have that, once I record and make a list of those healthier alternative, more rational thoughts, how do those make me feel? Generally, they make us feel a lot more empowered, right? A lot more confident, a lot more connected to who we are and our, our power. Um, and generally that results in us making healthier choices and decisions and behaviors. And that's the beauty of understanding our cognitive distortions and starting to name them. Um, I think a lot of people ask, or I talk to a lot of my clients about how to reduce their anxious thinking. Anxious thinking is just being in your emotional mind. It's just your irrational thoughts that take over. And sometimes they spiral and we don't know how to like stop it. We can stop it by identifying it, right? We can acknowledge that the irrational thought is there. We can name it. We can then go through that process of connecting our thoughts to our feelings, to our behaviors, challenging those thoughts. In fact, I call it like putting your thoughts on trial. Literally, like you're questioning, you're challenging, critically thinking about those thoughts. And that allows us to essentially be able to practice metacognition, self reflect, think about our thinking, right? And we build awareness of cause and effect. And so I encourage you, I think for a lot of people, especially if you know that you're prone to, high anxiety, or if you're working with a therapist and you're in therapy, and um for anxiety or other mental health challenges, I do think that for a lot of people, when we go into that anxious place, that emotional place, we're in our fight or flight response. I mean, we know this, right? So for some people, the first step towards reducing the anxiety, before we can even change our thinking, is that we need to ground ourselves into our body. We have to get out of the mind and into our body. And we can do that through a whole bunch of different things, through our five senses. So, a big one I use a lot, something I see in this moment is something I hear, something I smell, something I taste, something I touch or can feel in this moment, which grounds us into the present. So, if you're a future focuser, right, which is one of the cognitive distortions, and you're always thinking about what's coming next or the future, practice grounding yourself into the present moment. Practice actually getting yourself mindful and present. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a really great strategy. Instead of just using each of the five senses once, five things I see in this moment, four things I hear, three things I smell, two things I can touch, and one thing I taste, right? Or something. Um, I teach a lot of deep breathing exercises as well in my private practice. And in my wellness alignment sessions, that's something I love sharing about. That when we practice deep breathing, we activate the vagus nerve, which is the nerve that runs through the diaphragm, and that sends a message to our brain, which essentially slows the fight or flight anxiety response, and it activates the parasympathetic relaxation response. So deep breathing is like key to getting yourself out of your emotional anxious mind into your body and into a more present calm state, and then you can actually journal and make the thought record, because when you're in a really highly emotional state, you're reactive. There's no way that you can think, consciously, about all this stuff, right? So you have to get yourself into your frontal lobe to be able, so the body has to be calm enough to be able to engage our frontal lobe, which then allows us to start to challenge the thinking. Um, some other ways to do that, some other ways to ground yourself. Restorative yoga. I have practices on here in our circle under the guide section. You can do an entire restorative practice with me. I have some yoga nidra as well. I think my last live was a yoga nidra. And what else? There's so many different soothing activities and practices. And the wellness workbook that I created, which is on my website, aboundingcircles.com, you can literally, it has all this information for you. It's like a nice little, I don't know, 50-page workbook of everything that I'm talking about and more. So feel free to check that out on my website. And what else do I want to tell you? Oh, okay. I guess the last thing I just want to say um, is that if you are interested in diving deeper into this and you want some support with identifying what your wellness goals are, what your wellness barriers are, what are the things preventing you from living your best life, right? please reach out to me. Like, this is what I do. I love doing this. We're not going to sit down and do therapy, but I'm going to use some of these tools with you to help you to identify your goals, right? How could you be living a healthier, more balanced life? And we'll create a game plan. We'll come up with basically strategies that you can implement right away that will help you overcome some of the barriers that you're facing. And so you can live a healthier, happier, life, right? That's the goal. So I just, after the post that I made the other day where I asked, what are some of the stressors that you guys are experiencing? And I read everybody's comments. And I mean, I hope you can see some themes. Like we as women, there were a lot of a lot of us as moms feeling very overwhelmed. Um, and lots of different stressors, specific stressors, but the theme is the same, right? So I decided to open three spots in my online practice so that these are wellness alignment sessions for $88. Normally, my 45-minute wellness alignment session is 188. So this is like a really great discount. But I just, I really want to connect with you guys and I want to be able to offer support. And um, I just felt called to lower some of those prices and be able to really connect a little bit deeper and support those of you who are struggling. So please reach out to me. You can send me a text message, a Facebook message, comment on the live, whatever you want. But I will reach out to you if you reach out to me, and we'll set something up. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And let me just check the comments before I go. Um, okay, let's see. Lori Ann, I love these comments. So you said you have a hard time with really wanting to show up accountable and to hear people out and to not take mass amounts of internal criticisms since you're already so highly critical. Yeah. Um, with not taking everything negative said to heart, but wanting to better myself. Yeah, if there is truth. And you're saying you get caught in these downward cycles a lot and think about things so deeply. And I've had many years of untreated trauma, so it gets messy and confusing. Absolutely. Well, I it's hard when we're trying to navigate this stuff on our own because we're in it. You know what I mean? It's like we're in our own thoughts, we're in our own experience, and it really helps to have an outside person who can say, "Let me tell you what I'm observing. Let me tell you what I'm seeing," right? And then we talk about it and we come up with some ways to stop that spiral, um, and to help you to heal and to align some of, body, mind, spirit. If we're going to live a healthier life, we got to look at us from like a biopsychosocial perspective and address all of those things. So, Tamara, you said mind reading, that sometimes you feel things intuitively. Me too. Like I can feel what they feel about me based on body language, expression, and energy. You know, I feel things too intuitively. Like I'm very intuitive. Um, but I would say that we never really know what another person's thinking. Like their body language or their expression or energy might be what it is for a reason that you know nothing about. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just reading more of what you said. The identification meditation kept me sane after losing, oh, your little brother. Wow, losing your little brother this past year in a traumatic way. When it was first said to me, I thought it was ridiculous, but it really does work. What's the identification meditation? Are you talking about identifying your your thoughts, or what are you identifying? I'd love to know more about that. And also, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. Um, but I completely hear you and I agree that, um, that it can be so powerful to tune into our thoughts and to tune into and acknowledge our feelings, right? And that's also why, to be honest, like I believe in the power of affirmation. And that's why I came out with my affirmation cards, because I found myself in my private practice. I was literally saying the same thing to my clients again and again and again. And like, I did grounding. Okay, sorry. Lorianne was commenting that she's talking about the five senses, identifying things in the room to ground. I love that. I think that's really helpful. Um, but affirmations are powerful, and our thoughts do our thoughts do impact our daily experience, right? So one of the things that I've found personally is when I use those affirmation cards and I sort of pull a card and I find the one that resonates for me that day, I put it on my bathroom mirror, or I, um, will read it and reread it throughout the day, or I'll make it the background on my phone, or something that just allows me to like constantly sort of be reminding myself of that affirmation. And I think that if we're constantly, in negative self talk, then that's our experience. But if we're able to challenge that with more positive self talk, um, it actually can really change our daily experience. And so um, I want to share that I also have, you can download 10 of the radical self love affirmations that you can just print right from my website, aboundingcircles.com. And you can, use those if you want, to put them up if you like them. If you're interested in more, you can buy the card deck for $33 on my site, and you'll get an actual physical, like, you know, deck of cards, as well as my radical self love meditation, which is on my website. And you'll get the full digital version of all 48 cards. So if that interests you, please check it out. Okay, last couple comments here. So, oh, Tamara says, I tend to over apologize for other people's emotions. Oh my gosh, totally. Because I don't like when people are mad at me. But by doing so, that gives them permission to blame me. And yes, and to be honest, that I would say, thank you for sharing that. I would say that is a codependent behavior, right? When we apologize for other people, or a big one is we anticipate other people's reactions, right? So a lot of anxiety is caused by anticipation. It's called anticipatory anxiety. And that's essentially when we're anticipating someone else's feelings, thoughts, reactions, right? We're future focusing. Two, we're mind reading. But three, we're essentially practicing emotional reasoning, where we're assuming that something that they're thinking or feeling must be true, and that we're personalizing it's my fault, right? So we want to really pay attention to that, because it's powerful when you allow other people to feel their feelings. Like, Tamara, what would happen if you allowed other people to, if someone gets mad at you, they're mad at you. That's not your fault, right? Their thoughts and their feelings are on them, not on you. You're only responsible for yourself. And so, I don't know, I think that would be sort of a powerful thought just to sit with. Um, Lauren, you said that your husband's been doing the grounding meditation. Oh, that's so sweet. And it's incredible to witness how it helps him. Yeah, the grounding meditation is amazing. Again, that one is just identifying your five senses, bringing yourself into the room. And if that's too much, some people, their anxiety can be triggered by overstimulation of sounds or noises or other things. So for some people, just tuning into one sense, right? Even just like, sitting in your chair and noticing, I feel my feet on the floor, I feel my back pressing against the chair. I notice that my body is sitting up straight. I feel the pressure of the chair supporting me, right? That's using just one sensation and grounding yourself into the moment. So thank you guys. I so appreciate and I love the comments. And I'm happy to share more. So, feel free to add more comments, add more questions, and I'll get back to you. And again, if any of this interests you and you want to take it a little step further, and do a 45-minute wellness alignment session with me for $88, I'd be happy to do that with you, and, help you to get to a place where you can really feel good about your own wellness journey and where you are on that path. So thank you guys so much. Okay, last comment, Lorianne. You, yeah, that's so tough, because if someone is mad at you, how do you know that you're not bypassing or invalidating them, and not realizing you're being hurtful or the ass in the situation? Yeah, the emotions are confusing, but I think that if you are able to own your part, meaning if you know that you were reactive in a situation, then you own that. Like, you can apologize for that part. You can apologize for possibly reacting from a place of emotion, but you're human, right? We don't always get it perfectly. And I think that, again, if you can remember that you are not responsible for other people's feelings or emotions, that's not that's not ignoring your own role in it. That is actually acknowledging what's theirs is theirs and what's mine is mine. So, what I need to work on maybe is my reactivity. What they need to work on is their own stuff. Like, I am not responsible if they are angry or mad or like we each of us are walking around with a history of our own baggage and trauma and experiences, which how could you be responsible for that, right? They are. And so each person is really only responsible for their own healing journey and their own wellness journey. And I think, you know, that's kind of what brings all of us together is that we're, brave enough and courageous enough to sort of step into this arena and be willing to do this work on ourselves. But we're simply not responsible for other people's stuff, only our own. So if you need a little bit more support with that, check out the book Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. That's an excellent, excellent book if codependence is something you struggle with. Um, and I have a list of book recommendations in my workbook, by the way, which you guys can totally check out. Literally, there's like 14 different book recommendations that I repeatedly make to people in my private practice. So again, feel free to download or purchase and then download that wellness workbook. It is chock full of tons of great information. Thank you guys for participating and engaging in this live, and I will see you soon. I hope you have a beautiful Aloha Friday. Thanks, everyone.